Hello, MEC friends. We are continuing along in our series through the book of Revelation backwards. We are not going to be hitting every text. These first 4 weeks or 5 weeks, we kind of progressively worked our way backwards from chapter 22 all the way down into chapter 19. But this time we're going to take a big leap backwards. All the way to Revelation chapter 13. If you're like, why is there a bison on the cover? For some reason, if you look up the beast of the land, which that'll make more sense in a little bit, and the book of Revelation, a lot of the images that come up of are bison. Now, some of them are like super trippy, but I thought, who doesn't like looking at a bison from time to time? So you're welcome. Um, but we are going to be talking about three special digits, which are those famous three special digits that are oftentimes connected to the most evil and dark forces in the universe. And how appropriate, because it's October and Halloween decorations are out. We actually, I walked into my porch tonight to drop a decorative pumpkin. And a bat flew out from my porch. So it's good times. It's officially October. Hopefully they eat all the mosquitoes. It's been a bad year for that. Anyway, let's move on. So yes, we've been working backwards through the book of Revelation. And in our working backwards, we started that way because we wanted to make sure that we start with that which is like what we're looking forward to. What is in a year like 2020, what is it that we have to look forward to when God ultimately sets all things right? And some of the main takeaway points we've learned is that there is healing for the nations, that life as it's intended to be lived exists there, that it's not just like a tiny little space, but it's a huge, big space that God has for us, and that in this space that God is ultimately with us, and he makes all of it brand new, that he makes it a beautiful new creation for us. And those who do not want to be a part of it, those who do not want to drink the free gift of living water, they don't have to. And so our last couple of sessions have talked about like those who do not want to go and spend eternity where there is healing and goodness and bigness. And instead, there's a place called the Lake of Fire. And there's also a couple of epic battles that occur near the end for those who align themselves with the devil, and our responsibility to like speak truth to those people who are deceived. And so here we are. Between chapter 13 and chapter 19, there are a bunch of cycles of 7. There are trumpets, and then there are seals. I believe seals are before 13. But there are trumpets, there are bowls, there are angels. And these cycles, they kind of go through a typical order, and maybe next week we can kind of unpack that. And if we don't, then we can have a conversation about it if you're super interested in the rhythm that those 7s play. But what we're going to do today, before getting into our actual text for the day, I think we need to take a look at some historical context. And this historical context reminds me a lot of, ironically, of both Elvis and Tupac. The idea that there are these people who have, according to the official story, who have died. But you've probably heard the rumors that both of these gentlemen, Elvis and Tupac, are actually living on an island somewhere in the Caribbean, or wherever it is that these conspiracy theorists say that these previously dead characters are not actually dead living. And the book of Revelation was written sometime near the end of the 1st century, around, a lot of the scholars agree that it's around like 96 AD. And so John's super duper old. He's in exile on the island of Patmos. And this guy named Nero, who was one of the first great persecutors of Christians, other people persecuted Christians just fine, but Nero made a sport of it. Allegedly, this guy died in 68 AD. At his own hands in June. And the reason that this is important is because Nero had died. However, because he was such a bad dude at persecuting people, there were rumors that floated around that he had actually survived, or that he would be resurrected and would return to power twice as evil as he was before through the powers of arcane magics and all of that sort of stuff. And because of this rumor, and because of what a bad dude Nero was, Nero became like the shorthand term for evil embodied. When you want to say like, what's a good example of evil? Nero was one of the first people that would come to the mind, particularly if you were a Jew or a Christian, who definitely got killed a lot under Nero's reign. Now, when John is writing, he would have been also subject to the persecution of Domitian. However, Domitian was a bad dude, but nevertheless, it was Nero's name that was kind of like the way of talking about that which is bad. Kind of like, think about it nowadays. Whenever we want to say like a bad totalitarian dictator who does bad things, we say Hitler. It's kind of like, as soon as you say, oh, that person's a Hitler, you automatically know what people are trying to communicate. And in the same way, in the first century, Nero, this guy who was the embodied evil, and people were kind of spooked out of, what if he's not dead and he comes back? So, you guys ready for this? Revelation 13:11 through 18 starts like this. Then I saw a second beast coming out of the earth. There's the first chunk has another beast, but for the sake of time, we're jumping into the second beast. It had 2 horns like a lamb, but it spoke like a dragon. It exercised all authority of the first beast on its behalf and made the earth and its inhabitants worship the first beast, whose fatal wound had been healed. It performed great signs, even causing fire to come down from heaven to the earth in full view of the people. Because of the signs it was given power to perform on behalf of the first beast, it deceived the inhabitants of the earth. It ordered them to set up an image in honor of the beast who was wounded by the sword and yet lived. That's twice we have reference to this beast dying and yet living. The second beast was given power to give breath to the image of the first beast, so that the image could speak and cause all who refused to worship the image to be killed. It also forced all people, great and small, rich and poor, free and slave, to receive a mark on their right hands or on their foreheads, so that they could not buy or sell unless they had the mark, which is the name of the beast or the number of its name. And here's where he sets it up. This calls for wisdom. Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man. That number is 666. Now, you have probably heard 666 talked about before, and how it is the number of Satan, or the number of the beast. But look here in verse 18, it says, "Let the person who has insight calculate the number of the beast, for it is the number of a man." There is a particular man that it corresponds to this number. Now, naturally, John literally sets us up and says, calls for wisdom, have some insight, calculate this number. It stands for a man. There have been a few different ideas as to what to do with this number. Now, the most broad, I don't want to take an actual guess at this version of interpreting this number is that they say, okay, well, 7 is the divine number, right? You can repeat it 3 times because 3 is also a significant number in the Hebrew culture. And so maybe 666 is a parody on the divine number, right? Like that it falls short of 777, right? It's 1 short of it. 7, the number of completeness in God, and 6, the number of falling short of that, or incompletion, or the number of man. However, most scholars kind of agree that this is the chicken way out, because that number, he clearly says this is the number of a man. To calculate the number of the beast. Now, if you look at that little footnote in the passage, that little E says maybe it's the number of humanity, and that's a little bit more friendly. And so there it is. Maybe that's what it is. However, other people have made attempts to unpack what they think it is. If you use... now, you might be like, wait, how do you get a name from a number? There's this school of, I guess this... not a school. It's a methodology called gematria, which corresponds letters to numbers, and then you can add up what those letters are to add up to a number. And so Latinos adds up to 666, which would be like, okay, maybe Rome and the Roman Empire, that is the beast. Or Therion is 666, if you add that up, which literally means beast. And Now, both of those, again, are kind of like general and non-specific, and so it kind of doesn't necessarily do justice to what the text says, like have insight, it's the number of a man. Um, but there is also one other clue that we have, and that is that there is a slight textual variation. Now, this is weird because most of the time we talk about how scripture always, like all of the copies, and when those copies were copied and when they were handed down, they were always perfect. And the truth is that we have so many authoritative documents dating back to close to the time of authorship of scripture that we can be really confident about what is in the Bible and what was originally written. However, there are some areas of like less importance, which are not fundamental to like the main truths of Christianity, like Jesus is God and our salvation is through grace by faith. All of that sort of stuff. There's no disputing those texts, but this is one of those weird disputed texts where some of the manuscripts say the number of the beast is 666. In some of the manuscripts of the beast, some of the manuscripts of Revelation 13 say that the number of the beast is 616. And so some people say, well, this is why the beast one is better, because if you say therion, then that adds up to 666, and therio, which is Greek for of the beast, that adds up to 616. And so that covers both of those bases. Now, I would actually argue that John, from the Hebrew background, writing in a genre called biblical apocalyptic, which was largely written among a Jewish audience, who was a Jew, who discipled under Jesus as a Jew, and who was writing to a Christian movement, which is now a blend of Jews and non-Jews. I would nevertheless say there is also a Hebrew way of doing this, which uses the same gematria, but it uses the Hebrew letters instead. And this is why we talked about Nero up front, is because we've got, here's the Hebrew alphabet, by the way. And if you wanted to spell out Nero Caesar, you would use, in the Hebrew, you would use Nun, Resh, Vav, and then you would do Kaf, Samek, Resh. So that would be 50 plus 60 plus 100 plus 400, because 200 times 2, plus 6 equals 616. Nero Caesar, his common name. However, if you wanted to use his more official Roman name, Neron Caesar, if you add up all of those, throw in another noon, 616 plus another 50 equals 666. And so this accounts for that scribal differentiation, and it also accounts for and this is the number of a man. Now, we started off by talking about the rumors about Nero, not to say that like Nero is the Antichrist and Nero is going to come back someday and do all of these wild, crazy things, or that he is the second beast to come from the land, or whatever. I'm not trying to say that we need to keep our eye out for Nero and look for him. But what I am trying to say is that Nero was the embodiment of governmental, imperial, corrupt, twisted leadership that went directly against the people of God. And we, as the followers of God, need to know the number of that man, right? We need to know the number of that beast and be wise and insightful to what that means. Now, there's a couple of things that we can literally take out of this if we know that this is what we're talking about. And it kind of, it requires that we understand the history a little bit, that the book of Revelation isn't inventing something that an evil emperor could do by making a person take the mark on them. Ptolemy, who was a Greco-Egyptian king, he when he came back into Egypt, he in the book of Third Maccabees, it talks about him branding all of the Jews with an ivy leaf, and the ivy leaf was the symbol of Dionysus, which was the Greek god of wine. And so he actually like branded them like literally with searing, I believe it was like a searing iron of some sort, which that's probably the most extreme version of a beast leaving a mark on God's people. But then an example that like more closely resembles what would probably be going on in the day of John was what would happen in a marketplace called the Agora. There's an example of this in Ephesus. And to enter into the Agora in Ephesus, a person had to show that they were going to be faithful to the Roman Empire. And the way that you would do that is that you would recognize that Caesar is Lord. Caesar is God incarnate among people, that the king of the empire was divine, that he was a god of sorts that brought salvation to the world. And so in order to get into the Agora and buy and sell and trade, you would have to say the Pledge of Allegiance of the Roman Empire, which is Caesar is Lord. And you do this, and it's theorized that people would receive a mark of some sort so that they would know, okay, this person said the Pledge of Allegiance, they're good to buy and sell here in the Agora, which is like the ancient giant Walmart, right? And so in order to get in, you would have to worship the emperor and his rulership. Beasts, people who are power hungry and dead set against the power or the life of God's people, and dead set against the kingdom of God, right? Because it's a competing kingdom against the kingdoms of this world. Beasts require faithfulness and do not want you to be faithful to anybody else. They require primary allegiance. Because here's the thing, if the beast wants to do something, right? If a leader wants to do something that is evil, how inconvenient would it be if there's like a whole bunch of Christians who say, not going to do that because I serve a God who doesn't like that kind of thing, right? And so historically, what these types of totalitarian evil leaders would do is they would say, okay, well, you have to give all of your allegiance to me. Everything else comes after me. And then if you do that, we're all good, which is why yes, there was a pantheon of many gods in Rome, but you just had to make sure that you said that Caesar is God. If you say that one, you're all good to go, because then you'll listen to him when he wants you to go to war. But you could see why this would be a problem for the early church and even like non-Christians, the Jews of that day, because we're like Shema Israel, Adonai Eloheinu, Adonai Echad, means, Hear, O Israel, the Lord our God, the Lord is one, which means Caesar is not God, right? The early Christian slogan was not that Caesar is Lord, but it's Jesus is Lord. And so I think that there's like these, like historically there have been these, in recent history, there have been these theories like, oh, maybe the mark of the beast is like a barcode or something. And this sample right here is like how these bars there are 6, 6, and 6, and how it has to do with like it was a medication program that was being initiated around the turn of the millennium. And people were freaking out about it. But I think that more important than the like actual mark, whether it's an ivy leaf or a Caesar stamp or a barcode, I think more important than that is what the mark is trying to communicate. What the mark is trying to communicate is faithfulness to the beast, faithfulness to the empire, faithfulness to the thing that is not God, and putting that thing before God. That's what the mark is all about. And this mark had power, because imagine that you are an Ephesian Christian in the first century, and the Agora is the place where you buy and sell. And up until this point, maybe you had been a carpenter who helped in the idol worship or the idol manufactory, and then you lose some revenue because you decide, oh yeah, I can't make idols anymore because I worship the one true God now. And then to add insult to injury, you can't even go buy and sell and trade in the main shopping place in the city, because in order to get in, you have to essentially go against everything you believe in and say Caesar is Lord. And so a sense of belonging from the community gets ripped away from these Jews and Christians, who then have to bind together and take care of each other's needs. Right? We look at and idealize the church in Acts, and we're like, oh, they shared everything. They were like this beautiful cooperative community. And part of it, like, yes, that's beautiful and amazing, but some of it was necessity. Because by saying, I will not worship Caesar, I will not put my allegiance to the beast first, those early Christians then had to make a choice and say, okay, well, if we're not going to do that, we got to help each other. right? Otherwise, we're not going to be able to survive. If we're going to only worship the one true God, then we need to create like a sub economy that hinges on voluntary generosity and giving to each other. Now, the beast likes to leverage belonging in the economy to make you take the mark, to make you give him your faithfulness. Um, and so then it begs the question, what is the beast of our age, right? Traditionally, it's been this over here, right? The nation. Whatever nation state you are part of, that nation probably wants all of your allegiance so that that nation can then make you do whatever that nation wants you to do. However, we live in a really weird world where, yes, there are still national lines, and if we wanted to get, I mean, it's 2020, so if we wanted to get real, like there's political lines that are drawn. There's all sorts of lines that we could say maybe there are beasts out there trying to win our attention and take our sole allegiance. But I would actually take even a more like diverse approach to this and realize that like there are multinational corporations that own different pockets of this world. And they're like what the internet has done is given everybody access to everybody. And so these national boundaries that we have, yes, they are still pretty important to a lot of people. However, there are other things that are like vying for our attention, who want to say, please put my mark on your hand and on your forehead and be fully faithful to me. And so if we're going to identify the beasts of any age, we can look at the symptoms that we see in Revelation 13, and instead of trying to be like, ooh, does the number line up or not, and instead of trying to figure out what's the new empire, instead we look at what does the beast do and figure out who that beast is in our day. Revelation is powerful because it not only speaks about the future, but it speaks about every time that humans exist before the future. And so if you want to know who is the beast of your age, you would say, well, what in our world demands our undivided faithfulness, right? What is it in our world that says, no, you pay attention to me first, then everything else comes after? If there is anybody saying that to you, any force, any YouTuber, any corporation, any country, any entity that says you need to put me first before anything, then you can know that you're probably looking at a beast. Another is that the beast requires you to make compromises. Not everybody in the Roman Empire believed that Caesar was God incarnate. However, even if they didn't believe it, like they're just going to pinch a little pinch of incense and burn it and be like, Caesar's Lord, so they can go shopping. So another thing about the beast is, what compromises do the beasts encourage? What are there forces in the world encouraging you to compromise the things that are most important and sacred to you? And then last, what is the cost of not participating in worship? Now in the book of Revelation, and in the first century, it could mean death, right? If you do not participate in worshiping the beast. I know that there are places in this world where Christians still face death by not going along with the power that reigns over them. And so I know that that is still a reality, but I think that, for those of us here, this is not the reality, but I do still think that there's a cost. Just like the church in Ephesus would have had a cost of not being able to buy and sell in the main marketplace. Like, do you lose credibility? Do you lose friends? Do you lose feeling like you fit in and belong by not participating in worshiping the beast? And so, I'm not going to be like, so the beast is YouTube, or the beast is this political figure, or the beast is this country that's doing this thing. Because I think if we do that, we're actually missing the point of this, because the moral of the story is to say, when beasts demand your faithfulness, when they force you to compromise, and when they demand a cost, if you do not participate in their system, then you already know you're looking at a beast. And here's what the Christian response is. You see this throughout the book of Revelation. If we were going through the whole book, we would have touched on this 800 times. But the moral of the story is stay faithful. The response of the Christian is to stay faithful. And we stay faithful in three different ways. We stay faithful to God. by saying, God, you are my only God, and I'm going to do what you say. We stay faithful to each other by recognizing that sometimes not participating in the systems of the beast force us to have to band together. And 3, we stay faithful to what is good. We stay faithful to what is good and noble and true and lovely and pure, like Paul says in the book of Philippians. And so we stay faithful when beasts tell us not to. We continue to worship God when beasts say, worship me. We continue to stand for what is true and good and lovely and beautiful, even when beasts say, you need to stand for that which is not any of those things. And so my encouragement to you guys is to not worship the beast. Whenever any beast calls for your attention and says, worship me instead, you can boldly say, thanks, but no thanks. I will not. Because Caesar is not Lord. The beast is not Lord. Our God is Lord. Have a great rest of your Sunday, and may you always stay faithful. Bye-bye.